Hi, my name is Dr. Nathan Groot. I am a music instructor at the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts, where I teach string ensemble, applied string lessons, and other music courses like music theory and music history. I wanted to take a little time out today to talk about that period of time before your first rehearsal, or at least early on in the concert cycle of any type of ensemble. No matter your experience level, whether you are in middle school band or you're an experienced player in a symphony orchestra, it's important to consider how you go about preparing for rehearsals, especially that first rehearsal. Here are a couple questions for you to consider. How prepared should a musician be for rehearsal? How well should a musician know their part and know the music as a whole going in? You may have heard teachers before say that you learn your part on your own and learn everyone else's part in rehearsal. And I do agree with this to a point. You should learn your part on your own. But I do think that we can learn quite a lot about the music before we get to rehearsal. And that puts us even further ahead once we start that rehearsal. There's not actually a need to wait because we have so many resources now, especially online, that we can use to get our head start. Here's a question I'm often asked by students. Why can't I just learn my part in rehearsal? I'm there for hours and hours. I'll just learn my notes then. The answer is that playing the right notes and right rhythms, and in fact, all of the information on the page, so dynamics, articulation, all these details, these instructions, is just the first step to music making. These instructions for playing, these symbols that represent sound, are just a baseline, a place to start. To truly make music, especially with other people, there are many more steps to take after this. Your ensemble director probably will help you learn the notes and rhythms if you need it. I know I definitely will, but they are really excited to get past that, to get to the really good stuff, the music making. Trust me that they will thank you if you do your homework ahead of time. Another thing to think about if you're trying to decide whether or not it's worth it to prepare for your rehearsal is consider your colleagues. If you don't learn your part ahead of time and are holding the ensemble back by learning your part in rehearsal, in a way, you're kind of wasting your colleagues' time. So it's really the considerate thing to do to learn your part ahead of time. So all of this that we're going to talk about, all of this preparation, all of this work, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time. I think that as you pursue anything like this, it's really important to keep at the forefront of your mind why you're doing this. Why do you want to make music? Why do you want to share your voice? Everybody's going to have a different answer to this, and if you don't yet have an answer to it, it's totally okay. Experience brings clarity. I know that I wasn't sure for at least the first 10 to 15 years of playing. But I think that if I share my perspective, it might help clarify things a little bit for you. And you can sort of see if any of this rings true for you. For me, I'm rewarded by sharing my art, my music with other people. Creating a meaningful experience for my audience is my main motivation for creating music or collaborating with others to create music. Technique, so mastery of my instrument, learning the right notes and rhythms, all these details, serves a greater purpose, and that purpose is to share music with other people. I also just do it for myself. I enjoy making music. I find making music incredibly rewarding and meaningful, and I enjoy it just for its own sake. I've also come with plenty of time to enjoy the process of practicing, this process of problem solving, of finding issues and thinking about the art and science of practicing. This didn't happen right away, but with time, it's really become a very enjoyable part of the process. Now, all of these things come with experience, but if you never try, you'll never find out for yourself. All right, so you've just received your new music. It's full of all these new pieces to learn, lots of unfamiliar stuff. What is your approach? Now, maybe you've read it once in rehearsal. If that's when you received your music in rehearsal and your director said, okay, here's some new music, time to sight read, great. You may have also received your music a couple of days, a couple of weeks ahead of time. Either way, your task is the same. It's time to study. All right, first step, listen to the piece. Make it part of your everyday life. Put it in a playlist. Listen to it at least once a day. Try to engage in active listening. Listen to it with a score. If you don't have access to a score, you can ask your director. If they don't have access or can't share it, listen to it along with your part. Follow along visually while you listen. Little side note here, score study is a super important part of any practice routine. This is for ensembles, but this is also for anything you're practicing. Solo music, chamber music, anything that you happen to be working on, score study is an important part of your practicing. Depending on your experience level, this may also include harmonic analysis, formal analysis, historical or musicological analysis. These are things that you're going to want to consider, especially if you are in the late high school, going into college stage of your musical journey. After you've listened and learned about your piece, try to play it through, top to bottom, along with the recording. It's important that you make an attempt to do this at full tempo. This is what I call the information gathering stage for myself. This is what I do when I first get new symphony music. After you play it through, or for me, most of the time, it's make an attempt to play it through, assess what you can play easily. What can't you play? What can you kind of get, but not really, not 100%? How would you feel if that had been a real rehearsal where you were sight reading? As I play through, if there's a spot where I really fall off my instrument, I will mark an X at the beginning of the line on that page. Just a little side note here. There are a lot of schools of thought about the idea of listening to a recording in the early stages of learning music. You may not want to be musically influenced by other people through listening to recordings. You may want to wait so that you make your own interpretation. I think this is especially true for your solo repertoire, but it can also be true for your ensemble music, especially chamber music. Also, if it's a world premiere, or if it's just kind of a new piece, or if it's kind of an obscure piece, you may not even have a recording available. If this is the case for you, just skip this step and do your work with score study and a metronome. Okay, so after I've gone through my information gathering stage of what is this piece about, where is it hard, where is it not, I like to categorize things. So I use 3 colors. Do you need to use 3 colors? No, but this is what works for me, so I'm going to share it with you. Just like a traffic light, I use green, yellow, and red. So code green, this is the stuff that's really, really easy. That super long whole note, you can probably play it. That being said, yes, you can always play that whole note that lasts forever with better tone, with better intonation, with really even vibrato, whatever that may be. Yes, you can always improve upon these things, but the question is, can you play it pretty much perfectly in rehearsal without practicing it? At this point in the process, we're prioritizing things that really need attention, so stuff like this can be at the bottom of your list. All right, next category, code yellow. This is in the middle. This is not sight readable, but it's also not super hard. This is stuff that maybe you could take a few minutes out of your day, maybe a few minutes before rehearsal, to really work through and figure out. It's maybe something that you could almost sight read, but still fumble over a little bit. This is going to take a little bit of time, but it's not the hardest stuff in the piece. Something to consider as you're looking through this music, what's code yellow? Think of it this way. When you're in rehearsal, There's a lot going on. You're trying to watch the conductor. You're trying to listen to the other musicians. You're trying to match exactly with them, get every articulation exactly right so that you're right on it with everybody else. If that is taking up enough brain power to make it impossible to play these spots, but you might be able to play them in another context, this might be a code yellow spot. I like to practice these spots in a rapid fire way, one after another, cycling back and forth. This is a form of practice called interleaved practice, and it's one that I use for a lot of different music, not just this middle difficulty stuff, but you can be particularly rapid fire with the way that you approach these types of code yellow spots. All right, so now it's time to talk about those code red spots. These are the spots that give you nightmares and clammy hands before rehearsals. These are the spots that you look at and think, what are those notes? What are those rhythms? I can't play this. I don't even know what this is. They're the spots that cause you to fall off your instrument in rehearsal. In some cases, you may need some additional help from your teacher, either a private teacher in lessons or your ensemble teacher after rehearsal. And that's totally okay if you do. I'm sure they're happy to help you out with that. But you'd be surprised how much you can work out on your own if you put a little bit of time and effort in. Much of the how we practice these difficult code red spots is a little bit outside the scope of this video, although I will touch on it just a little bit. I'll make more videos in the future, but for today, I can at least point you in the direction of already existing resources, which I'll do here and then also in the description. These code red spots will take the most amount of time and the most amount of effort. I typically organize these spots in a Google Doc, or if you're old school, you might just use a piece of paper. I write down the specific measure numbers, so maybe like measure 29 through measure 35 is a trouble spot. I'll write down the goal tempo, a metronome marking, and I'll write down my current tempo that I can play it at. This is going to change each time I practice. This is the point at which I will add my friendly reminder to always use your metronome when you're practicing. Now, the recommended books I have are in my office, and they are also in the ASMSA library here on campus. The first book I want to recommend is Learn Faster, Perform Better, A Musician's Guide to the Neuroscience of Practicing by Dr. Molly Gebrian. I studied with Dr. Molly at Sewanee Summer Music Festival about 10 years ago, and she's remained a really important mentor and just person I learn a lot from ever since then in the intervening years. She also has a really good YouTube channel if you like to watch videos and learn that way. I will also provide a link to that channel. You can learn a whole lot about practicing just by watching those videos. A second book I recommend is Practice Mind, A Complete Practice Model by Hans Jensen and Alexander Miksik. This is also in the music suite here, my office, and also the library. I'm going to share one graphic from the text. The Practice Mind text is from page 33 in chapter 7 that's going to be useful for our discussion here. It describes this process that we go through when we learn new things, starting with unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. So basically, this process that we go through with difficult tasks. It's a good thing to keep in mind, especially when you're approaching something that is really challenging you. When you start one of these code red sections, it's likely that it's going to feel a little bit impossible. You might even feel like giving up at first. And you might have the thought that, hey, maybe nobody will notice if I don't practice it. Maybe I can kind of flub it in rehearsal every time and in the concert, and nobody will really care that much. But remember, you owe it to your colleagues in that ensemble and to your audience to put forth your best effort. Here's something I want you to remember. There's a tempo at which you can play basically anything on your instrument, as long as your technique allows you to reach those notes. Usually, if you can't play it, it means you're playing it too fast or you're trying to take too big of a bite, so trying to play too much musical material all at once. Sometimes it's literally about just getting from one note to the next. You can just start that way and then zoom out from there. I often start out in my own practicing at half tempo or even quarter tempo and play just a measure or two at that slow tempo. You need to find a tempo and a scope at which you can play something perfectly so that you are not practicing your mistakes over and over again and you're allowing yourself to give your full attention to these trouble spots. It's really just all about perseverance. Here's an important note about slow practice. When you practice really slowly, it's important that you include all of the details. This includes dynamics, articulation, phrasing, anything written on the page. Be sure you're including all of these things. If you practice, say, a pianissimo section fortissimo, or play with the wrong articulation over and over and over again, you will have wasted your time. And I don't know about you, but I like to be as efficient as possible so that I'm not wasting a ton of time when I'm practicing. Again, there's a ton we could talk about here in terms of the science of practicing, neuroscience, how to go about these things, but this is beyond the scope, far beyond the scope of this video. Please let me know if you have questions about it that you want addressed right away, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Okay, so back to the big picture. You've organized all the material in this piece. You have categorized it into easy, medium, hard, green, yellow, red, whatever you want to use. You've attacked those really difficult sections and you're now a master. You can play it at tempo with your metronome perfectly every time. Now, it's time, if you are using a recording, to try to put it back into context with that recording. You remember our very first step? Try playing along again. You can use speakers, or if you use headphones, just uncover one of your ears so you can hear yourself. You might be surprised when it doesn't go perfectly. After all, you've learned your part so well. Why isn't it going perfectly? Unfortunately, it sometimes takes a little bit of time to make that transition of playing by yourself to playing with other people or playing with a recording, basically fitting into a larger whole. If you're struggling with this, it can help to slow the recording down just a little bit so that you're not at the very top of your ability to play in that tempo. So if you can't play it perfectly with the recording at 120 BPM, maybe slow it down to 100 BPM. One great thing on YouTube now, it's a new feature, is you can slow the audio down very slightly and it does not affect the pitch. This is something I use a ton in my own practicing. Essentially, it lets you simulate rehearsal. So your first rehearsal isn't really your first rehearsal. Next, record yourself and listen back. This is an extremely important part of all types of practice for ensembles or especially for your solo repertoire. You can also use this at all stages. Let's go back to one of those code red spots. Maybe you're playing it at half tempo and you want to find out if you're playing it really in tune, really in time, with all the details. Record yourself and listen back. This really helps us listen with a more critical ear while our mind is not being distracted by the act of playing our instrument. Engage your problem-solving skills when you do this. Diagnose and treat problems. You have to essentially be your own teacher when you are in a practice room. Now, if you've gone through this process of learning the piece, listening to it with a score, doing your score study, learning about the piece, practicing it, categorizing these difficult, easy, medium spots, and really attacking those spots that were challenging you at the beginning until you can play them perfectly, and then putting it back in context, playing along with the recording, you should be in pretty good shape for that first rehearsal. Now, like I said at the beginning, this is step one. There are many steps that follow this. You're going to learn a whole lot in rehearsal about playing with other people, about breathing together, and about really making music. All of this work on the front end will just make that so much more rewarding and enjoyable when you are in rehearsal. It'll free up your mind to focus on playing with your colleagues rather than just playing the notes on the page. Now, this video has only covered a few ideas and some of my thoughts. It hasn't covered everything that I could have gone over. If there's something that you have questions about, or you think I missed, or think I should have included, definitely let me know. Feel free to add whatever you'd like in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I hope this video was somewhat useful, or at least has opened up some new ways of thinking about that time leading up to the first rehearsal. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, happy practicing.